Welcome to Aunty K's, your favorite radical queer indigenous auntie, bringing you tarot every day. Hello folks, and welcome to Aunty K's Tarot. Today we are trying something a little bit new, so please like and definitely in the comments let me know what you think. This channel is a place where we talk about tarot and politics. As an Indigenous tarot reader and fortune teller, I see the impacts of politics, colonialism, racism, and capitalism in reading all the time. Frequently, tarot brings these issues to the forefront via the art or guidebook, sometimes in a way in which we can learn, often in a means of sucking us deeper in to accept cultures of oppression and erasure. We have the all-white decks, the decks that claim diversity which is marginal, and the decks that recolor older works with black and brown skin tones on faces that still look white, artistic blackface. What gets done about tarot's icky white supremacy is neoliberalism. We look for the easiest band-aids, preferably ones that are easier to rip off. The biggest neoliberal fix of tarot is the rewriting of Pamela Coleman Smith to make the tarot non-patriarchal, and while we were at it, non-racist, non-homophobic, non-transphobic, and abracadabra. We have bisexual black Pixie, except that her genealogy is well documented, and our reimagining her as black comes from her own racist actions. And that she was bisexual is anecdotal. So at least that one's a maybe. The remaking of PCS was white feminism getting her recognized and then saying, she represented you too, just secretly. And it's all being a lie anyways. The likelihood is she'd have hung out with the New Age's MAGAs and grifters. Okay, so let's dig into the issue at hand, followed up with the research. Before I dig in, I wrote these thoughts several months ago. Then I sat on it. Then recorded, but needed to re-record. Then sat on it. Well, last week I reviewed a deck and called some of this out, so now it's time to get this done. So let's get into this. Coleman Smith didn't intend to draw non-binary people. We can all see by the exceptionally cis-normative, heterosexual depictions of the art. Not to mention that wouldn't have been in European vocabulary or consciousness of the time. Coleman Smith was a follower of Waite and the Golden Dawn, a cis-het group, broke up into factions. Waite's faction was absolutely cis-het Protestant Christian. They then went on to redo the Tarot de Marseille, a French white colonial deck, into the RWS deck many of us know today. Learn to read from, and many readers still use, myself included. They altered some of the images to be more Protestant, English, Christian. This was one of their goals. They also wanted to include all their stolen Kabbalist knowledge that they had altered to fit their racist, anti-Semitic views. We all know the RWS deck is full of racist, problematic images, understandings that promote not only whiteness, but normalize the homophobic leanings of the time, promoting marriage of women to men, Adam and Eve concepts, etc. As tarot readers, we have dealt with this by using the proliferation of RWS-based decks that alter these images to fit the world we want today. Not a world of new concepts born out of white neoliberalism, as a wannabe white left would like to pretend, but a rebirth of the world majority we are reclaiming after hundreds of years of colonialism. But also one the white left is appropriating into a more comfortable neoliberal framework. The other ways the tarot community has dealt with this is the remaking of Pamela Coleman Smith. The first step by the white neoliberal tarot reader user in this process was to insist we recognize Coleman Smith as the artist, and now, instead of calling it the Rider-Waite deck, we call it the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. This I have no issue with, except that we do not do this with all the many modern decks where an artist created the cards we love and someone else authored the guidebook. I really don't understand this when over half of us don't even read the damn guidebook. Or there isn't a guidebook, just keywords. If we are going to call it the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, we can also do this with all the modern decks and equally recognize the artists who actually made the aspects of the decks we use. The reason we recognize Coleman Smith has little to do with recognizing the artists of tarot and a lot to do with wanting to remake the deck most of us love into something acceptable. The neoliberal whitewash of supremacies. Coleman Smith is recognized simply to sweep the glaringly racist, homophobic concepts of the Rider-Waite-Smith deck under the rug. After all, these were Waite's opinions, not hers, right? No, Coleman Smith was a follower of Waite, thrilled to work with him on his project. She made all the characters white, Protestant, straight people, incorporating anti-Semitism in with Kabbalistic symbols. She picked the image for the Six of Wands to be the conquering of the Americas, and little surprise when later we examine her actual family lineage. The next remake of Coleman Smith was to claim she was black and bisexual, and therefore this isn't a racist heteronormative tarot deck. We see this elevation of Pixie in many decks, articles, and other formats. For much of the 2000s, this has been the unsubstantiated claim and held up in other decks such as Pamela Commemorative Collection, Pixie's Astounding Lenormand, Pixie's Whisper Tarot, and more, glorifying the innocent artist in the Wiser Tarot and the deck I just reviewed, the Smith Tiny. First of all, we don't know if she was bisexual. She never claimed as much, although she certainly may have been. We simply know she lived with a female companion at the end. We also know she had a friend who was a lesbian. But let us keep in mind that if she was bisexual, maybe she'd have been a follower of Crowley who embraced this. Rather, she was a follower of Waite who thought such leanings were unchristian. She might have been bisexual, but if so, she kept that in the closet and most certainly never ever suggested any bisexuality or homosexuality or varied gender expressions in her art, except maybe anecdotally the Queen of Wands might have been that one lesbian friend. Coleman Smith's depiction of Baphomet as the devil altered the classic half-male, half-female depiction, but kept the half-human, half-animal depiction, an opportunity, in my opinion, not taken. She could have left 3 people in the Lovers cards instead of Adam and Eve and a snake. Furthermore, I, as a queer Indigenous woman, simply just don't give a flying fuck if she was, and my reasons why are in the next most important section of this conversation. Pixie was white, and she was a racist. The idea that Coleman Smith was part black is nothing more than a glorification of her work in private minstrel shows and a stretching of genealogy. And when we do this, we are perpetrating that her blackface was real. We are holding up her racism and making it okay. That is not acceptable. Her genealogy is easy to find, and I am going to summarize it. Some white folks want to hold on to the fact that her mom was from Jamaica, a colony her maternal grandfather moved to continue his family's line of building railways. First off, let's be clear. Jamaica was and is a colony. White folks colonized, wiped out the majority of indigenous folks, and replaced them with black folks they enslaved. Coleman Smith's mother and father came from long lines of high-up elite colonizers. Her mother didn't live in Jamaica because she was black. Also, the racism of everyone in Jamaica is black. But because her family had been very active in the colonizing of the Americas from the 1600s in Massachusetts. You want witch hunters? That's her mother's family, and her father's is no different. Now I know that some neoliberal whites want to pretend that actively enslaving black folks means maybe there's black ancestry. Let's be clear. A person's blood does not inherit black DNA every time your grandfather or great-grandfather violently violates those he enslaves. Children born of this violation remained politically black and were not incorporated into the actual family as offspring. It was a way of creating personal property at that time. Let's take a moment to look at Coleman Smith's lineage closely, and I'm going to be quoting Thea Wershing for this. Coleman Smith is a direct descendant of Thomas Hooker, 1586 to 1647, founder of the Connecticut colony, on her father's side. He didn't have the vast enslavement holdings of plantation owners, but yes, he owned enslaved folks. The first Smiths of the Hooker line, the first of them arrived in the colonies in the 1630s. Her grandfather, Cyrus Porter Smith, was a rail tycoon, helped found Brooklyn's first gas company, and was a director of the Brooklyn's Union Ferry Company, and was a senator. Her ancestor on her maternal grandfather's side, Edmund Chandler, arrived in Plymouth in 1629, making him one of the first few thousand residents of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. He was also part of the Puritan separatist community at Leiden. Pixie's maternal grandfather's side, the Coleman side, boasts an ancestor in the direct line who arrived in Boston in 1635, putting him in elite company with the first few thousand colonists in the Massachusetts Bay. She was also a direct descendant of Thomas Coleman, 1602-1685, who is one of the first men who purchased Nantucket Island from indigenous folks for 26 pounds English money on May 10, 1660. Pixie's grandfather, Samuel Coleman, 1799 to 1865, was a prolific American publisher based in New York City. This is a sketch of Pixie's maternal grandmother, Pamela Coleman, from the front piece of a book that she wrote for her daughter, Corinne. Corinne went on to become Pixie's mother. This is the connection that led Coleman to make a mission of publishing American authors. This speaks to Coleman Smith's supremacist notion that she, an elite white woman, should publish African folktales. The side of this family is credited for promoting American culture through books, which included the first colored illustrations. And this family also boasts artists in the Hudson River style and group. All of this to say that Pixie's ancestry is marked by the distinguished first families of America and were absolutely well documented for generations as not just white, but the respectable upper-class elite kind of white. Coleman Smith took this colonizing white supremacist background and used it to save black fairy tales by writing a book of them, whitewashing them, and profiting off of them. She took her theater background, dressed up as a black mammy, and sometimes as an Asian fortune teller, to put on private minstrel shows in the salons of her wealthy white peers telling stories. Mark Twain thought she was brilliant and hilarious in her depictions of blacks and Asians. Hilarious because of how she represented them, according to him, as stupid, backwards, and unable to speak proper English. PCS reportedly made Twain laugh so hard he cried, which means she made a mockery of the folks she portrayed. Her black vernacular was held up by her white peers as brilliant and most accurate, even seen as more accurate than black performers, who were sometimes incorporated into minstrel shows of the time. The famous picture we all see of Coleman Smith is one of her dressed up for her famous minstrel shows. This is Pixie, an active participant in Orientalism and anti-blackness. This is your great artist you all uphold as justification of how the colonial Rider-Waite-Smith deck isn't racist. This is a whitewash and erasure of the harm Coleman Smith did to black and Asian folks. Did Coleman Smith's peers make statements that she was just like this exotic race or maybe a touch of that race? Yes, they did. And it was as false and as Orientalist as when people do that today, talking about their skin tones when they tan to make one more exotic. The New Age crowd was all into a touch of exotic but still white in Coleman Smith's time too. But she was a suffragette. Of course she was. And do you know the main argument of her suffragette friends at that time? It was that white women had more in common with white men than they did with the animal-like and inferior BIPOC folks. They were more intelligent and less emotional, even despite menstruation, and therefore should vote. They used eugenics for their arguments. We cannot make the Rider-Waite-Smith deck via Coleman Smith's art or works into something modern and acceptable because it is not. Bisexual or not, the woman was a racist, not just of her time, because there was plenty of folks of her time and earlier who decried racism. She was not one of them. Instead, she was a very active perpetrator of neoliberal racism of her time. Did she die unwealthy? Of course. She was a white woman who didn't marry. But she is also a white woman who shook hands with the white patriarchy and said, I'm all in. If we want to use the RWS decks, and many of us do, we cannot be like Pamela Coleman Smith. We cannot carry on her minstrel performances and call them authentic. What we have to do is confront the truth of who made the deck many of us love. So that, folks, is me getting a little pet peeve I have about the glorification and whitewash of Pamela Coleman Smith. And that's me getting it off my chest. I wrote this out so I could stay on track and hopefully keep all the facts straight. But my links are all in the description box and are probably even a better job. Thank you all and see you later.